They tell me it's Provincetown time, but nonetheless, I won't lay that on you, those of you from the town. We'll be coming in slow but sure as we go, I'm sure, as I've been just moving them all over the town. We took a walking tour of Commercial Street today, and then saw some stage reading performances at Provincetown Theater, some of the early plays. So my name is Jeff Kenny. I'm the president of the Eugene O'Neill Society, and I, along with Martha Carpentier, is our hosting our she's the president of the International Susan Glaspell Society, and we've been hosting this conference for 4 days to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Provincetown Players beginning in 1915. We want to thank Matt Clark very, very much for his wonderful hospitality and allowing us to be here at, thank you, Matt. And we had an opening session last night talking about the history of 1915 up in the mezzanine with that gorgeous view. If you haven't been up there, you got to see it. And then, and now here in the Marc Jacobs room. So we appreciate it so very much. So part of our conference is 2 panels that we've set up, roundtable panels with scholars in the different areas, and I'm going to let Martha introduce all of that today for this panel. We're doing another tomorrow at the Provincetown Museum at 11 a.m. and Linda Bensvie will be our moderator for that, and another topic of that, I'd be happy to give you that information. And then tomorrow we have a whole kind of a list of activities that we're doing at the Provincetown Theater. They've been wonderful collaborators with us doing this. And so we're seeing at 2 o'clock, which is open to the public, by the way, readings of 2 more of the original plays from 1915, Change Your Style and, help me?
Oh, Contemporary.
No, in the afternoon. Change Your Style and
Contemporaries.
Contemporaries, thank you. And then in the evening at 6 o'clock at Provincetown Theater, actual performances, not stage readings, of 4 of the original plays, and then followed by a panel at 8 o'clock that Tony Kushner, Pulitzer Prize winning playwright, Linda Bensvie, myself, and Rob Dowling, who is the author of a new biography on O'Neill, will be sharing together a panel moderated by Susan Rand Brown. And then we're having a reception afterwards, celebrating the Centennial, and then a brunch on Sunday morning. So if you want more information, I know that the Provincetown Theater .org or .com, I changed it. No, it's .org. Sorry, it is .org. Has all that information. We'd love you to join us for that. So, Martha, without any further ado, please introduce.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm the president of the International Susan Glaspell Society. I'm remembering with very fond memories 2005 when we joined the Eugene O'Neill Society, embraced us with open arms. We were a new society formed in 2003, and they could not have been more welcoming and generous. And we participated in that conference. We had panels. We started a friendship that's modeled on the original friendship of O'Neill and Glaspell, kind of mutually inspiring each other, supporting each other, and ever since then. So it's been a wonderful partnership and hopefully ongoing.
Yes.
I do want to just announce here, while I have a captive audience, that in next summer, the summer of 2016, the Susan Glaspell Society will be hosting a centennial celebration of Susan's great play Trifles in New York City. That is scheduled, many thanks to Sharon Friedman. We are going to be able to use the Gallatin School at NYU on June 23rd and 24th, so 2-day conference. What else did I want to say about that? Yes, you know, you might think after 30 years, Trifles was rediscovered in 1973. What's left to say about this? And that's sort of part of what we're going to be assessing. I think Linda, we've spoken maybe about Linda chairing a where are we going, where have we been? Everything's in the talking stages.
But we do have an agreement from the Berg that they will open the archive. The head of the Berg will open the archive to display and show materials from Glaspell and some Cook and
Wonderful. That's great.
And we have I'm sorry, Linda. We have a tentative expression of interest by who's that guy's name at the Public? Who
I forgot his name.
we forgot his name. He does the reading series at the Public Theater. Said, you know, yeah, he would think about scheduling a reading during the time of our conference. And we're also going to have panels that actually are going to involve new research on trifles and jury of our peers. So we're very excited. We hope you'll join us then. You can always go to the Susan Glaspell Society website. We'd love you, if you're not a member, to join us. We have PayPal. It's very easy to join the Susan Glaspell Society, and then you'll get all the emails telling you what we're scheduling and building up to that event in 2016. So now, oh, and also, Emmeline Juve and I have edited an anthology on trifles, new approaches to trifles, that McFarland is publishing, and that is going to be out soon. We're dealing with proofs now. And again, like, who knew we could generate new research on trifles? It's just been amazing. And Drew has a piece in that collection, and Sharon. Yep. And,
well, I interviewed 2 filmmakers who've adapted trifles.
That's right.
That's really
Barbara Zieblo has interviewed 2 directors, the Orange Tree Theater folks, and we have young scholars. We have interesting new approaches, and Linda's amazing comparison of Beckett and Glaspell, which is very exciting. A lot of linguistic discussions, of which Linda's is one. So it's going to be an interesting volume, and so we're looking forward to that next year. Yes.
I was wondering, I hope you don't mind my interrupting, but I must just tell you, I think this is incredible, because I'm here visiting Provincetown for the first time.
Oh.
I went back to school 5 years ago, never heard of trifles. My English professor had us read that play, and I always loved it. And I came here not knowing you were having this festival. I went last night to the theater.
Oh, good, you saw it.
So I just feel like,
good.
and I love O'Neill, and I just feel this is such a wonderful coincidence. So
Well, it was meant to be.
I just want to say the mantra that we always say, trifles is great, but did you know she wrote over 50 short stories, 9 novels, and 14 plays? So that's one of the missions of our society, is to try to spread the word beyond trifles, but 2016 is about trifles. So now I would like to introduce our discussants, and just a reminder that it's a round table. They're not reading papers.
Oh, I'm reading a paper.
I'll
look at it.
She'll look at you. That's papers.
12 page, 20 minutes.
No, it's not 20. 19.
What we mean is, they may be reading.
She has words.
Each of them will discuss their topic for about 10 minutes or so, and then we hope to get a discussion going, including all of you. So let me introduce Judith E. Barlow. She is Professor Emerita of English and Women's Studies at the University at Albany SUNY. Her books include Final Acts, the creation of 3 Late O'Neill plays by, there's a semicolon in there. Okay. 3 Late O'Neill plays by American, wait a minute.
Okay.
No, plays by, that's
What's that doing there?
The creation of 3 Late O'Neill plays. I left out the word plays.
Okay.
Too many plays.
But then, and plays by American women 1900 to 1930, plays by American women 1930 to 1960, indispensable tools for research and teaching. Women writers of the Provincetown Players, a collection of short works, to which we're probably all going to be referring in this discussion. And How in an Hour. She has been a visiting professor at Nankai University in China and Sofia University in Bulgaria. Judith is going to go first, and she will be discussing such plays as Louise Bryant's The Game, Rita Wellman's The Rib Person and Barbarians, and Edna St. Vincent Millay's Aria di Capo, discussing how these women explore the causes and consequences of combat, as well as the question of whether World War I was likely to be the war to end war. Sharon Friedman is Associate Professor of Modern Literature and Drama at the Gallatin School of New York University. She's the editor of a volume of essays entitled Feminist Theatrical Revisions of Classic Works, and the author of numerous essays on feminist criticism and drama. Her work has appeared in such publications as Theater Journal, American Studies, New Theater Quarterly, Women and Performance, New England Theater Journal, and Codifying the National Self, Spectators, Actors in the American Text, and Intertextuality in American Drama. She's currently working on 2 book projects, American Theater in the 1990s, co-authored with our beloved Cheryl Black, whom we miss very much.
Senior editor.
and Gendered Violence in the Theater of War. She has written about Susan Glaspell since 1977 and has been an active member of the Susan Glaspell study since its inception. Sharon is going to kind of pick up. We have a nice cohesive, adding to the plays that Judith is discussing, Glaspell's Inheritors, and giving added attention to Mary Heaton Vorse's journalistic writing on war and her coverage of the Women's International Peace Conference. And finally, Carol DeVore Langworthy, the biographer of Neath Boyce. You know this little dinky thing? She teaches.
Oh,
yeah, it's modest. She teaches in the nonfiction writing program of Brown University's English department. She did master's and doctoral theses on Neath Boyce, edited a volume of her diaries and autobiography, and is currently at work on a biography of this founding member of the Provincetown Players. As Neath's biographer, Carol says she has been unable to locate much concrete evidence of the warm, as kids say today, the BFF, warm BFF fuzziness, coziness, interchange between Neath and Susan as compared to the epistolary relationship with Mary Heaton Vorse. So Carol is going to summarize the 2 women playwrights' friendship as a backdrop for assessing their intertextuality. So let's wait till each person has given her topic and then hopefully ask questions and get into a roundtable discussion.
I'm going to hijack things for exactly 1 minute.
yes, and forgive me, I should have had you do this before, Mark. I apologize.
No, she told me. I just thought it would come better here.
Sorry,
This
okay,
is
great.
directly related, I think, to the
It is
Glaspell
related.
Society.
Yes, it is.
An organization called History Matters Back to the Future, sponsoring a playwriting contest. And the way the contest works is that you are required as a professor to teach 1 play by an American woman written before 1960. Your students are then invited to write their own plays inspired by that. Doesn't have to be about the same topic, just inspired by it. Send it into the competition, which is, I'm embarrassed to say, is named the Judith Barlow Award. I had nothing to do with founding
They
this.
paid her off.
They actually, listen, nothing's been named after me since my mother put my name tag on underwear when she shipped it. The winner gets $2,500. The winning professor gets $500, and there is a reading with professional actors in New York City of the winning plays. And we just had the first one a couple of weeks ago. So please spread this around to all of your colleagues. It's a way of encouraging faculty to teach plays by women, and also for women and men to write plays. I mean, $2,500. I would go back to school and write plays. Okay. Maybe we should move forward. Should I move? I drop this if I just did.
I know it's a little bit, I agree with Sharon.
All right.
Were it not for the war raging in Europe in 1914, it's very possible that many of the writers and artists who came here would have done what their colleagues did a decade later, which was go to Europe, the way Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Gertrude Stein did. Instead of having the celebration of the Provincetown Players, we would all be at Drew Eisenhower's apartment in Paris, celebrating the Paris players with a little Courvoisier and wishing your son a happy second birthday. Unfortunately for us, the war was going on there. They came here, so we got Provincetown. Even though when the Provincetown was founded, the war was going on in Europe, it had not reached here yet. Obviously, it was a very important issue for the Provincetown players, and at least as important for the women as the men. A very large percentage of their plays addressed the war in some way, and I want to look at 4 plays by women in which the war plays an important part. 2 of them are by Rita Wellman, who was a very active member of the Provincetown Players, and the first one is a play called it was originally titled Barbarians, and it was when it was presented by the Provincetown Players, it was called The Horrors of War. Why the name had been changed, we're not exactly sure, and the Horrors of War has never been discovered, that particular script. But since Barbarian matches all the descriptions, it's obviously the same play, and it was part of a 1917 bill called the War Bill. And there were 3 or 4 plays on that bill all about the war. And Barbarians is a farce, and it's set in an unnamed, presumably European country, where 3 sisters, thank you, Chekhov, are bored to death. And they hear that the the enemies, are about to attack. And instead of running away, they come downstairs in their negligees, smile their smiles, and hope that these guys are romantic and certainly better than the guys in their town, for whom they have absolutely no use. Their view of war is very romanticized and very possibly comes, at least in part, from Shaw's Arms and the Man. When the barbarians arrive, the women flirt with them, only to discover that the men are much more interested in home-baked pies than they are in pillaging. After offering to set the table and helping them clean up, they go off to fight their war. One clear element in this play, as well as in her next play, 1918, The Rib Person, is that she doesn't know a whole lot about war. It's a very romanticized view. Not that the U.S. wasn't involved. At that point, we were involved in fighting in the Philippines. We were involved in the Boxer War. But war was something, there hadn't been a war for several decades on our territory, and it's a very romanticized view. The other strand that runs through this, though, is that women's roles are so boring and circumscribed that even violent war must be better. They think their father was killed in the war, and one of the martyrs says he was lucky. He died honorably. We're sitting here with nothing to do and nobody to talk to. And The Rib Person is about 3 women. Thank you, Chekhov. Who are, again, bored to death, this time in an urban setting in New York. One of them, the Rib Person, doesn't want to find anything to do except depend on men. But one of them, Doris, is a correspondent, and she's a war correspondent who is obviously very bored with what women are allowed to do, and she's delighted when the announcement comes that war has broken out in Europe. And she's dressed and off there. She's already covered China. She's already covered wars in Turkey. Rather than stay home and do what women are supposed to do, she's off in a flash. And the last one is a young woman named Lucille. This will sound very unfamiliar to any of you with older teenagers. She's a recent college graduate who has no idea what she wants to do. She's bored. There don't seem to be any jobs open for women, and when the war breaks out, even though the U.S. is not in the war yet, she goes and signs up for training to become a nurse and prepares to go overseas, which in fact at least one Provincetown woman did. And again, aside from certain amount of naivete, there is the sense that women's lives are so circumscribed and narrow that they'll get out any way they can, even if it involves volunteering to nurse soldiers. Wilman would later get a much more realistic vision of war, and 2 years later she wrote a play called Dawn, which was not performed by the Provincetown, but was published, in which a nun is nursing a soldier in a Russian hospital and is disturbed to find not only that the man that she is nursing was someone who raped her when they invaded her town, but that he doesn't even remember her. And she tries very hard to come to terms with the fact that while he may be a victim of war, clearly she was much more so. And that by this point, Wilman acknowledges that the price of war for women is much more likely to be rape than cleaning up after a polite meal. So those are two, they're both comedies, they're both, as I said, by the same woman. There's a second strand that runs through plays by women, and that's a fairly strong strand of pacifism. World War I was not a popular war. Not that wars are ever popular, but we weren't invaded, we didn't have to go in, and a lot of people felt that World War I was being fought for the rich by the poor, and a lot of people, I'm sure going to hear more about that, members of the Provincetown women and men opposed the war and opposed any idea of our entering the war. Louise Bryant, and of course Louise Bryant was a very central member of the Provincetown, even though she was here for just 2 years?
One, yeah.
So it was a
One
year.
summer here, yeah.
Wrote a play called The Game. And The Game is an allegory between life and death, where they roll dice to see who's got, whether someone will live or die. And the two main characters are young artists, a man and a woman, and they're rolling the dice. But there are several references along the way to war and how many people are dying. At one point, Death points out that life should not be so concerned about two artists. Quote, "You've been losing millions of soldiers in Europe for the past 2 years." Interestingly, and I can speculate if people are interested, there were some revisions made when The Game was performed by the Provincetowners, and one of those was to modify a little bit the references to war. Part of that may be a stylistic issue because it was done as a very heavily stylized sort of art piece. And one may have been that even as early as 1915, there was already pressure, there was already beginning to be censorship, there was already talk about treason and acts of treason, and the Provincetowners themselves talked about being afraid to have their names attached to plays that were about war. At the end of the Provincetown version of The Game, the last line is a lament for soldiers, where life says, quote, "They are the flower of youth, there are dreamers among them." The end of the original typescript has life saying, "I must find a way to stop wars. Maybe youth will help me." In all likelihood, as I said, there's more than one reason why that was changed. The most interesting and the most long-lasting of the anti-war works is Edna St. Vincent Millay's 1919 aria Da Capo. 1919, the war is already over. It's unclear when the play was performed. The Treaty of Versailles, which was almost as unpopular as the war, had already been signed, but it's probable that she was already writing the play before the treaty had been signed, and she was very much aware of what was going on. And it's a tragedy embedded in a harlequinade, as Brenda Murphy observes in the Provincetown Players, quote, The play draws on two well-established traditions, the Harlequinade, which has its origins in Commedia dell'arte, and the pastoral dialogue stemming from Virgil's Eclogues. And those two are woven together into a kind of modernist collage. And the framing play are two characters who are Pierrot and Columbine, traditional characters, who are having a meal. And they're very, very sophisticated New Yorkers, I would say. They're worrying about whether or not they like artichokes and what modern art looks like. And does it take any talent to be an actor? Can you just yell? And meanwhile, the other two characters, who are shepherds, start a war for no reason at all, other than this starts as a game. By the time the game is finished, they are both dead. They have divided the land. Again, a very timely topic, shall we say. They have divided the land. One has poisoned the other. At the same time, he was being strangled. When Pierrot and Columbine come back on stage, they're annoyed that there are these characters there, and it's their play. So they throw them under the table, put a tablecloth over them, and go back to exactly the dialogue that they had at the beginning. And it's a very powerful anti-war play, and it's interesting that the two most directly pacifist plays, as you were, are fantasies or allegories. They're not realistic plays. Partly it may be the style that these playwrights preferred, but I think it's also, as the war was progressing, it was dangerous to come out and say, we shouldn't be over there, we shouldn't get into that. It was easier to take traditional characters and have them kill each other off. When Bryant was writing in 1915, there was, as I said already, growing fear of censorship. 4 bloody years later, when Millais wrote Aria da Capa, the militaristic spirit that had spawned World War I, it was very clear that that spirit would not go away soon, if it ever did.
Thank you.
Well, I am going to read, so. I'm not going to tell you anything most of you don't know, but I'm going to frame it just a little bit differently, okay? So I begin my comments on a celebratory note, but also to interrogate our celebration a little bit as we visit ideas and the place that gave rise to the players a whole century ago. Then again, I'm almost a century old, so anyway. And there is much to celebrate. As Judith Barlow and other theater scholars have said, the Provincetown was the most important of the little theaters that emerged just before America entered World War I. And she cites Robert Sarlos's assessment that from the perspective of drama alone, it introduced more native playwrights, had a greater impact on audiences and critics, and a longer life than any similar group. My note of interrogation, however, involves a momentary reflection on what theater theorist Susan Bennett calls performing nostalgia, which I believe is in part what we are doing this weekend and in this panel. Bennett argues, quote, that it is the inevitable and symbiotic relationship between the writing of the past and the performance of the present that informs performing nostalgia. And it is good to be a bit self-conscious about the function of such ritual performances as commemorative memories, preserving or reimagining versions of the past by representing it to ourselves in words and images, and oh, what words we have, as we heard earlier today. Bennett draws our attention to the more conservative functions that nostalgia has served, its purveyors identifying a singular traditional history and seeking refuge in mystical connections with an ennobling heritage. Michael Schutzen asks why some versions of the past persist more successfully than do others, and why different agencies of meaning operate to different effect. Another Michael Frisch, answers by saying, we need projects that involve people in exploring what it means to remember and what to do with memories to make them active and alive as opposed to objects of collection. And I believe that's precisely what we have been doing, making them not objects of collection, but active and alive, with the continued production of scholarship and performances that unearth multiple histories of the Provincetown players and question why this group, its members, its ideas, its conflicts, contradictions, fissures, continues to speak to us with such intensity. Edward Said tells us the more important than the past itself is its bearing on cultural attitudes in the present, why we yearn for a lost stage of being that we imagine better than we are now, also shapes the kinds of histories we continue to write. And among the histories that my colleagues have written, many are here, we hear that the players looked to the aesthetic influences of Europe's independent theater movement, of course, and to the political influences of anarchism and socialism in the US. However, in the past 2 decades, scholars have given attention to yet another story of origin that most pointedly bears on the present, the unprecedented numbers of women who participated in the players. And you'll see that I'm deeply indebted to Cheryl Black's The Women of the Provincetown, to Judith Barlow's Women Writers of the Provincetown Players, to the voluminous critical biography of Susan Glaspell by Linda Ben-Zvi, and scholarship by Barbara Oziblo, and of course Brenda Murphy. The list goes on and on. And to you, Carol. First, the stats. You probably know this. 13 of the 29 individuals listed in the original players' incorporation papers were female. Cheryl Black asserts that at a time when women playwrights were rare, women directors rarer, women scenic designers nearly unheard of, that Provincetown female members were, excelled in all of these areas. 16 of its 51 playwrights were women. Women wrote more than 1/3 of the plays produced and directed. She says nearly 1/2 of the plays. 6 out of its 28 scenic designers were women. Its leading costume designer was a woman. Its leading actor was a woman. And its leading director, thank you. I'm hoping that you fill in the blanks here. Was a woman. And it is important to note that the emergence of a director's theater and the importance of design as theatrical specializations were just really emerging. And we're reminded of such names as director Nina Moyse, artist Marguerite Zorat, of course the writers Edna St. Vincent Millay, Juna Barnes, Susan Glaspell, Neith Boyce, many others, Louise Bryant, all the ones you mentioned. No small feat. In their recent 2013 publication, Contemporary Women Playwrights, Penny Farthing and Leslie Ferris reveal that, since the 1990s, we of course have many numbers of women playwrights represented. But even in the 2000, 2008, 2009 off-Broadway season, it was still 4-to-1, 4 male playwrights to 1, female playwright. So, do we need to imagine a better reason to look back on the players as an extraordinary opportunity for a generation of women, most of them self-proclaimed feminists, to bring their various talents and commitments to social and aesthetic movements, to these other movements, to the Provincetown players? What, we might ask, made the players such a hospitable place for women? Sometimes. I know what you're talking about. I imagine in part that it was the strong relationship between women's theater activity and the social activism of the period. Cheryl Black makes this point, as does Robert Zarlos, when he credits the impact of outstanding women on the cultural awakening, of which the theatrical revolution was a part. That's what I'm trying to do, not separate them, but bring them together. So that the charter membership and its audiences included members of various progressive organizations, the Liberal Club, the Masses, a range of feminist groups, the Lucy Stone League, the Feminist Alliance, the Women's Peace Party, the Women's Trade Union League, the Equality of Self-Supporting Women, the Men's League for Women's Suffrage, the National Women's Party, the American Birth Control League, and Heterodoxy, of course, a discussion club for women who thought of themselves as having unorthodox views. So you can see that all of these organizations are sort of part and parcel of what was happening in the theater. And I think this is really crucial, that the theater was a kind of laboratory for thinking through these issues theatrically. So it's not surprising for the feminists of the players that themes such as monogamy, the double sexual standard, the challenges of free love or companionate marriage, birth control, the desire for equality, autonomy would loom large in many of their plays. Certainly Leave Voices plays, Constancy, Enemies, Winter's Night, almost all of Glaspell's plays, Juna Barnes' plays. This was, obviously this was the intertextual note. And though the women of the Provincetown shared with the men the ideal of a new America, the belief in the power of individual creative effort to reshape self and society, and the power of cultural expression to humanize, I'm quoting, American life, the struggle over sexual politics seemed to be felt acutely by the women as they grappled with the tensions between their stated goals and the pull of traditional beliefs. The men, as Brenda Murphy has written, seem to manifest a psychological resistance to the emancipated woman, despite their support. It is not surprising then that for the feminists who found a home among the politically forward community of the players, personal politics was not always separate from political action, and some of these tensions are seen in the plays. And so I just want to end with my case in point, which is to contemplate the possible influence of the social activist Mary Heaton Vorse, who really only acted in the Provincetown Players, and I believe in the, once she became involved in peace efforts, and once she had been overseas witnessing some of what you just referenced, she sort of drew away from the Players as an organization that she was really involved with. But I'm thinking about her influence possibly, and I know, Linda, I'm going to depend on you to jump in here, on Susan Glaspell, whose political sensibilities were conveyed almost wholly through her writing, as she said. Vorse, as you know, devoted her life to labor journalism, labor organizing, world peace, and various feminist projects. Most importantly, as Ross Wetzian tells us in The Republic of Dreams, she was present at the birth of all of the seminal institutions in the village of the teens, a kind of elder stateswoman. She was a charter member of the Liberal Club, a contributing editor to the Masses, and she was radicalized by the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in 1911 and covered the Lawrence textile workers' strike in 1912. She reported on the latter, and throughout her long life, she was really dedicated to this kind of labor journalism and activism. With the advent of the First World War, she traveled to The Hague and also to the front. But she represented the Women's Suffrage Party of New York City as a delegate to the Women's Peace Conference. So I'm skimming the surface here of her political activities to also mention the difficulties in her personal life that she weathered and did not write about. Breaking family ties with her well-to-do New England family, especially her mother. She came to the village only to become widowed twice in 5 years, left with 3 children to support, mostly through her fiction writing as well as her journalism. Her first marriage to Bert Vorse was deeply troubled as her writing progressed and his did not. He supplantings, maybe, his failures with various trysts. After their separation, he died, and she found a more congenial partner in Joe O'Brien, who also died a few years later. Suffice it to say that she suffered a great deal under domestic strains, leaving her children from time to time for work and for political activity, and the guilt that ensued from needing at times to flee her family responsibilities. She was depressed about her daughter, so-called defiant daughter, Mary Ellen. I think it's just so interesting that she named her after her mother and herself, Mary Ellen, interpreting her troubles as proof of her failure as a mother. As a close friend, Glaspell no doubt saw all of this, and it is my contention that it might have very well informed some of the angst that Glaspell renders in several of her female characters. Vorse, like Glaspell in her scathing critical satire, Woman's Honor, Vorse wrote, "I cannot imagine anything that would affect better the moral health of any country," she was more concerned with the country, right, "than something which would blast the greatest number of that indecent moral institution, the perfect lady, out of doors and set them smashing and rioting." And yet her biographer, Dee Garrison, tells us that she coped with Bert Vorse's failure as a writer, at first by easing his suffering through her maternal solicitude and calm. She uses the word calm, perhaps echoing Glaspell's ethereal Bernice, character Bernice, in deceiving her glib and shallow writer husband that she has forfeited all for love, including her life. At the same time, she sounds like Bernice's confidant, Margaret, a politico, the new woman, who struggles to understand Bernice's choices, when Vorse, finally in open resentment, talks about men who are small enough to want to feel superior. In other words, I'm imagining that Glaspell had Vorse's two sides in two different characters. This is just conjecture, of course. It is not difficult to see in Vorse certain qualities, if not goals, of Claire Archer in The Verge, who also severs ties with her venerated New England family, husband, lovers, even her daughter, as she strives to create a new life that has never existed before. Vorse, recovering from a miscarriage, she'd actually, after losing both husbands, had a major affair in her life and suffered a miscarriage from that affair and became addicted to morphine. Vorse once said, "I am imprisoned. I hold myself by free casting around to find a way out of the detail of the house, and I crawl through as though expecting blows." And all the while, as Dee Garrison tells us, she was hounded by red hunting agents from the Department of Justice during and after the war, as were the players, as were the masses. Finally shut down the masses, as many whom Glaspell knew. But government intimidation clearly finds its way into Glaspell's inheritors. For those who dare to resist the jingoism of nationalism in a country that, as Vorse would put it, went mad for war. Take that.
Well, thank you both. I think we already have a lot to talk about.
No time.
I actually plumped mine up when I was told that we had
Lost a
yeah, so I might cut. So the title of mine is Neath and Susan Frenemies, because I'm interested in the friendship between Neath Boyce and Susan Glaspell and Mary Heaton Vorse. So I will launch into my formal approach here. There's critical consensus now about the Provincetown players, how they produced three major American playwrights, Eugene O'Neill, Susan Glaspell, and Neath Boyce. As a biographer of Neath, I'm especially happy that she has been elevated into this triangle, or this trinity, and that Constancy is being revived this weekend. And that it's no longer considered just a curtain raiser, as the Gelbs characterized it in their first biography of Eugene O'Neill. There's also another near universal consensus about another triad or trinity in Provincetown player history, that Neath, the three-way friendship between Neath and Susan and Mary. Biographers of Glaspell and Vorse accede to this, as do I. I've been studying this three-way friendship and think it has some particular valences that somewhat resemble the valences in some of the plays. And I'm just getting started on this idea, so I'm happy to have other people chime in. Other people have talked about intertextuality, namely the triangles in O'Neill's plays and Boyce's plays. And, well, I'll get into some of the other intertextualities later. So I'll start reciting. So first there's Judith Barlow's groundbreaking essay, Susan's Sisters, in the 1995 book edited by Linda Benzavie. And it started this discussion, I think, and the use of intertextuality a lot in terms of assessing the players. And Judith pointed out that Neath's play Winter's Night, which shared the opening bill with John Reed for the Provincetown Players' opening season in New York in 1916, may have been one inspiration for Glasgow's most famous play, Trifles, which is the story of a farm woman who apparently strangles her husband because he strangled her canary. Just to complicate things further, Floyd Dell later claimed that Neath got the idea for the story from an oral story that Jig Cook said, and Sarlos mentions that. And then Barlow further speculates that Winter's Night may also have influenced Eugene O'Neill's Beyond the Horizon. So you get some idea of how these things kind of conflate and play out with each other. Both of those plays, Winter's Night and Beyond the Horizon, have brothers in love with the same woman. And both of the women, well, all of the characters use biblical names. And both Trifles and Winter's Night feature farmers unable to fathom a world of women beyond the domestic one. And further, Barlow points out that Neath's equivalent of Glasgow's caged bird that's strangled in Trifles are the potted plants that Rachel in Winter's Night is worrying about and trying to keep growing through the winter. She's worried about that. But most obviously, both plays are set in Midwestern farmhouses in the middle of winter. And in the aftermath of the recent death of a male head of household or head of the operation. And both discuss degrees of unhappiness in marriage. Susan would meditate further on the meaning of marriage in her later plays and novels. Another trope of intertextuality is around the issue of mother-son love. Barbara Ozielbo's biography of Susan Glasgow claims that Susan understood especially how this form of family love was portrayed in Neath's last play for the Provincetown Players, The Two Sons. Ozia points out that Susan understood, or she made a connection between the play's emphasis on maternal overprotectiveness of a son and what was going on in Neath and Hutch's family at the time. They were very worried about their second son, Charlie, who was recuperating from polio and needed a lot of special physical therapy and a lot of attention. And so Neath was worried about what the effect was going to be on Charlie. And so in the play, the character, the elder son, Carl, steals his younger brother's girl because he's jealous that his mother loves the younger son more. So, you know, it's kind of a more in-depth assessment of this sort of triangle than we would get with the Smothers Brothers routine and Gila more. Okay, so that's sort of the background of the accepted intertextuality. But let's get back to the female friendship. So it's Mary Heaton Vorse, who began summering here in 1906 and wintering thereafter. And then in 1911, Neath and her family came here. And Neath was married to the radical journalist Hutchins Hapgood. And they came here with their 4 children, and drawn by Mary. And later in life, Mary Heaton Vorse became the godmother of Neath's granddaughter, Neath Boyce Sousa, later Faust. Neath Boyce Faust, later Sousa. Gotta get these names right. So that kind of shows just how much that family, the connections were going on. And Mary's second husband played Rex in Neath's Constancy on their porch on July 15th, 1915, with Neath playing Moira, the lead female in this play that inaugurated the Provincetown Players. And Neath was with Mary in New York when Joe died in fall of 1915, and being supportive to Mary. Okay, so that's Mary. You've already heard a lot about Susan, so I don't need to tell you about that. But in this triangle, or this three-way girlfriendship, I've been trying to figure out, kind of what roles people were taking. And my analogy is that Mary is the girl who had the car. She had the wharf. Okay. And she was older, and she was the more mature and kind of the wise leader of this trio, I think. I don't know. All three women were deeply involved in the creation of Provincetown Players. Neith and Susan had plays on the very first offering in Neith's living room, and Mary provided the wharf, which was the key to the group's growth. And there's still, contention over the founding myth, if you will, the origin story. Susan, in her hagiography of Jig Cook, her husband, The Road to the Temple, credits Neith with having helped Jig with the group's statement of purpose and manifesto. And Mary, in her last memoir, Time and the Town, said that Jig and Neith said it together. But I'll get back to that later. Okay, and then Jig came home and wrote it down. And so this is just another example of the importance of getting it in writing, really. Okay, so more about the friendship. I actually resorted to making a chart because I was trying to keep all of this straight. So I will just sort of bore you with my chart. And I'm sure other biographers get into this too. You're trying to keep track of where people are at different times. And so, okay. Neith was the oldest one. She was born in 1872. Mary was born in 1874, and Susan in 1876. So, I mean, they were fairly close in age. Neith was born in Franklin, Indiana. Susan in Davenport, Iowa, which often makes people say, well, they were both Midwesterners. Mary was born in New York City, but she was really from this old Yankee family in Amherst, Massachusetts, and she grew up within that rarefied intellectual atmosphere. But then her family had enough money so they traveled around Europe, and she really had a private education in Europe. Like she said, her first language was German, actually. And I think, her fluency in all these languages is what enabled her to become this really famous international war correspondent. Okay. So Neith was born in Indiana, but left at about age 2. Her parents were driven out of this small town because of scandal, which is another whole story. And they eventually, of course, ended up in Los Angeles. And that's where she had her formative years from 10 years, 8 to 18. Okay, and in our walking tour this morning, we discovered just how closely they lived to each other. Neith lived, I don't know, I mean, most of the time at 583 Commercial Street. Susan at 564 and Mary at 466 Commercial Street. So they were, really almost in each other's pockets or yards all the time, and their kids were always running around together, and they were doing parental things together. Like Christmas of 1915, I'm not sure in which living room it was, but they had a conjoined Christmas tree for all the 3 kids, or all the 3 families' children. And they ate their festival dinners together. So that gives you some idea of just how close they were. Okay, all 3 women were involved with the Provincetown Players. Neith wrote 4 for the Players, Susan 11. Mary didn't write any, I don't think, but she wrote 2 plays later, but they weren't ever put on by the Players. Neith acted in her Constancy and Enemies. Susan acted quite a bit in Suppress Desires, The People, Close the Book, The Outside, Woman's Honor, Tickless Time, and Bernice. So Susan was really, active as an actor too. Neith and Susan both directed. Mary wasn't active, but she was really famous for an offstage blood-curdling scream. Was that in for Before Breakfast?
Winter
Okay, yeah. Oh, Winter Night. Thank you. Right, yeah. So, I mean, she goes down in history for that. Okay. Interestingly, I mean, they were all writers, but so many, they had backgrounds in regular journalism. I mean, in the mid-1890s, Neith was a copy editor and a reporter for the Commercial Advertiser in New York City, when Susan was at the same time a newspaper reporter for the Des Moines News. And Mary's wrote special things for newspapers, but she kind of got into her writing career as Albert's career was failing. And I think you could say she kind of took over his role as international war correspondent.
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And she did a lot of magazine journalism for all of her life. I mean, big commissions for major magazines. Let's see. Okay, Holmes, all right. And then I think someone said that this group of 3 women plus Wilbur Daniel Steele and Margaret Steele comprised what were called the regulars, who always came to Provincetown every summer and really were the heart of the culture of the Provincetown players. All right. Children, this was a big deal. Neith had 4 children. Mary had 3. Susan had 0, but she had 2 stepchildren, and she suffered the tragedy of a miscarriage that affected her deeply. So they all had some experience of maternity, if you will. I think another binding thing is that they all had various addictions and trouble with alcohol at different points in their life. Yeah. And that's something that's kind of hard for a biographer to document or trace, but I think it's there, as we all know. Okay. It's interesting that all 3 died in Provincetown, even though they'd been all over the place. Neith died here Susan died first in 1948, I think on her living room couch in 564 Commercial Street, with her maid in attendance. Neith died in 1951, somewhere on Commercial Street. I'm trying to find it. She was being looked after by Mary Heaton Vorse, but Mary was at her home in Washington when Neith died. And Mary had the best death of all. She died in her own bed in 1966 at age 92. Yeah, so she really lived a long, full life. And Dee Garrison has, claims that she really had the time to resolve the issues with her children. And her daughter, Mary Ellen, became sober and joined AA and all of that. But okay, so that's kind of the confluences. And I think I'd better move around. I mean, I thought it was interesting that when Neith was dying, Mary was looking after her, but there's no connection to Susan, that Susan was dying. So they were all writers, and they all wrote letters, but I'm finding very few warm, friendly letters between Susan and Neith. Whereas there's this lots of family, lots of warm letters between her and Mary that are really chatty and all of that. So that's what made me, kind of wonder what was going on with the friendship with Susan. And I'm wondering if there wasn't just a little slight tinge of jealousy on Neith's part when it came to Susan's success, because Susan did everything that Neith aspired to. She wrote plays that were successful. She got a Pulitzer for one. She wrote a lot of novels. Mary wrote 2 novels that we don't know anything about, but they were published. And I think Mary deliberately kind of took herself out of that ratings game and just kind of played, the girl driving the car, if you will, to get them to the dance. And it was interesting because Mary Ellen Mary's daughter, aspired to be a novelist. And so she had Neith reading Mary Ellen's early attempts at novels and things like that. And to me, that I was thinking of some of the resonances with Susan Glaspell and her mother, you know, and all of, you know, living her mother's dream, and all these kind of female things that happen with relationships. Okay, so this jealousy thing, and back to the founding myth. In the late 1960s, Neith's second son, Charlie, gave an interview to Louis Schaefer, who was writing a biography of O'Neill. And according to Schaefer's notes, Charlie said, "The Provincetown Players was originally my mother's idea. She had written plays, done quite a bit of writing, and thought no use to wait for Broadway to produce their work, but should do it themselves. She was the one who urged it. She was the builder type, kept after things, didn't let them drop. Organizer and builder, felt very strongly about this. She sold the idea to Jig Cook, who grabbed it and ran." Now, if this is true, how could Neith not feel a bit cheated out of getting credit for the concept of the Provincetown Players? Her documents are silent on this, although she speaks through the mouthpiece of her husband to some extent. And then elsewhere, Charlie told Schaefer that Susan was, quote, "Susan was always about her work," which I could decode to mean that his mother felt, again, maybe a little jealous. So that's the way I would assess that friendship. And it's not, you know, it's just kind of petty, gossipy, small town analysis on my part. So I'm willing to discuss this further with anybody who wants to gossip. So thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I'm just a tag on there.
Yeah.
Is it possible that Susan felt left out of the shared mothering
I think
that
so.
Neith and Mary had?
Yes, I think
Yeah,
so.
I bet.
Yeah.
Yes, Linda's nodding.
Yeah, I
Yes,
guess
I think so. Did you want to add to that, Linda?
Oh, it's a very interesting thing that you bring up about the three of them. I had the feeling that Neith was very close to Jig also, because there are references back and forth between Jig
Yes.
and Neith, not just how to build a dial.
Right,
Although
right.
Neith wanted to know how to do that.
Right.
But the relationship. The other thing, of course, is that when Susan wrote, she wrote to both of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
She didn't write to Neith. I never found any. I don't
Yeah.
remember any Neith Susan letters, but
Right.
Susan wrote to Neith, to Hutch and to
And to Neith, yeah, she wrote to the couple. And then Neith would often write the response, but then sign it Neith and Hutch. But it's in her handwriting, yeah.
I will say that I find Susan's letters from Greece, especially when she wanted them so badly to come and visit them when they were in Italy and other places,
Right.
actually pretty compassionate, and I mean,
Right.
she just really pleads with them. And then
Right.
the
And
letters
then-
she writes them compared to the letters she writes her mother about Jig's death
Right.
and the funerals
Yes.
are about as personal and intimate as I've
Right.
ever seen. But again, it is to both of them. There's no
Right.
question.
Yeah.
She's and even Jig is pleading with them to come
Right.
to visit them, you know, in Greece.
And they kept inviting Susan to come and join them in
Italy.
France and Italy, yes. And I think she wanted to, but she couldn't
Right.
pull herself away. Yeah.
because Nilo is very close to I think
To Miriam.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
Oh, they
the
were
idea
best
that
buddies,
second
yeah.
year in Greece,
Right.
Nilo was with them. I think
Right.
for both of them that was hard. So the idea that the families would be together and Neela and
Right.
Beatrice would be together. Even in fact, I think one of the plans was even to go, that Jig and Susan would go to Italy, and somehow that didn't
Yes.
work out, and
Right.
that they would come to Greece, and they
Yeah.
didn't.
Well, and in fact, when Jig died, if Nilla's mother hadn't said she had to come back, she was going to go to
Oh.
Italy. It's my understanding, and that was a plan that she'd go there and home. But when Molly said no, I want Nilla back, that was they changed to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, interesting.
Well, I have a question here.
Yes.
since that dynamic has been added in about the invitation to just Susan, what was the relationship of the husband or the men? You know, because that's a factor in a decision partners make.
Right.
Well, Hutch and Jig, oh my goodness,
very close.
they were
Yeah,
so
very
close.
close.
Yeah,
Right.
so just
They were the kind of this kind of close, you know.
There's a wonderful description. I love the book, Martin
Hartley.
Hartley's
Right.
autobiography.
Right.
So
And
good.
he describes Jig and Hutch walking down the street, and Charles DeMuth and Marsden Hartley would see them and immediately go the other way.
As fast as they could.
And he said, what do they have to talk about so much? They were constantly talking. It's
And it
a
never
wonderful
stopped.
little scenario.
Yeah, okay.
They played chess, and Neith and Susan would sit there and talk themselves while the two of them were playing chess all the time.
Okay.
And especially here in Provincetown. So.
Okay. In fact, was there, I was just thinking in the Victorian and the modern world, Hutch has this story that he says that one night Susan came in and pulled Jig home. And later that evening, he heard, Hutch was walking and he heard Susan and Jig making love. So he said that Susan was very embarrassed about that, but being good-natured, she forgave him. But I guess she was jealous of the time that Hutch and not so much Neith and Susan, but Neith and Susan jealous of Hutch
And Jig.
spending time with Jig.
Yeah, right. Something right. That's interesting.
And in Victorian and the modern world, Hutch gives full credit to Jig Cook for O'Neill's career, basically. I mean, you know, you can debate that, but that he doesn't.
Right.
Basically full credit.
Yeah, Hutch.
Okay. Really good friend.
But that's a misogynist book, I must say, about what he says about the Verge and all sorts of other things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I wondered who, between the two of you, I think you might have talked about the war correspondent character. Remind me which play is that? Is it
In Rip
Person, yeah. Do you see any? Most people don't know this, but I think I know you do. Is that Sophie Treadwell actually was part of the Players for a very short amount of time, and of course she had just come back from being quite a famous war correspondent, and then went back and did some. And I heard resonances of that in there, and it's not as known that she was around. She was actually production coordinator for 4 months of the Players. And I just didn't know if that had any.
I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure of the timing on that.
Yeah.
Because I'm not quite sure when Treadwell was there.
She was there December of 16 through the spring, pretty
right,
much.
and that would have Rib Person
Was
that
then,
would have been running a little bit late.
Yeah.
But there were, I mean, as you say, there were a lot of the Provincetown and the Provincetown women who were correspondents. Nobody quite
Right.
did what Treadwell did.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of them were. So I suspect that, as I said, the timing is a little bit off on that. But I'm sure she got the idea from the fact that there were so many journalists and female journalists in the group.
Yeah.
And that was an opportunity. They were just beginning to let women go overseas to cover, in some cases, actually the battles.
Yeah. Interesting.
I was interested that, you know, one of the Rib, is it the Rib? No,
The Rib
the
Person.
Barbarians mentions
Barbarians,
rape, you
right.
know, because that's, you know, what I'm writing about now, but that wasn't usually identified as an issue.
What was it?
Rape. I mean, we know that everyone knew
Right.
that it was happening, but it wasn't
Right.
identified as a war issue.
Right, but
You know,
by
it's
the
a
time.
byproduct and business as usual, but not.
Right, by the time she wrote the second play, I mean, it's so hard to imagine how different the world was at that point, because there was no TV. We weren't
Right.
watching what was going on over there.
Right.
But in those 4 years between her writing Barbarians and her writing the later play, obviously reports were coming back and there was information.
Well, and her father was one of the most famous journalists of all time, William. Wellman, and in fact, he was the guy that tried to fly the
Tried to fly over the South
the dirigible to the South Pole,
the South Pole,
and
yeah.
they were clearly rich because she was there to greet him in Europe and would go and spend the time. So she was quite continental herself in that sense,
Yeah.
and then had a terrible marriage and life in New York City, even though she was a very privileged in terms of money. And so it's so interesting to me because she's so not like the other women described,
Right.
and yet somehow found. I just wonder if she was one of them that just sent in the plays, and she didn't act in any of them.
No, she wasn't.
And,
She was not an actor, but she wanted a form for her plays.
Yeah.
And there were quite a number of plays that the Provincetowners did not do.
Right.
I think there was at least one they voted on not to do. Others, and the others, I don't know if any of the others were performed. They were published.
Yeah.
She got quite a number of her plays published after the Provincetowners closed. But she was not certainly in the way that neither Susan was. She was not.
Yeah.
And
But they seem to keep going back to her. I mean, Jig used to do that. He used to go say, "Oh, we need a play by Rita Wellman. Let's go get it and see if she has one." That kind of thing. You know, he would do that a lot.
I think at least in one case they announced one that they were going to do that never
Yeah.
appeared.
That's right.
It was
Sure.
sort of need a play. Let's get a Wellman play.
Yeah, and just like he told Susan, go write us a comedy. We need a comedy bad at
Yeah.
Christmas. You know.
And she was up. I mean, she was so. It'll take forever to figure out how many plays she wrote because she wrote under so many different names.
Yeah.
Yes.
She wrote under made-up names. She
Yes.
wrote under her maiden name. She wrote Barbarians was written under Rita Leo.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Under what name?
Rita Leo. So there are so many. I mean, I found it just by accident in the Library of Congress because it was in the right time period. I thought, I'll take a look at this.
Yeah.
But she used her husband's middle name. She used her husband's first name. She used her father's name. She used her maiden name.
And it turns out the playwright Mac Wellman is actually
Is
a
it-
relative.
Is it
He told me no, and then wrote me back 6 months later and said, "You're right. I need to talk to you about this." So, yeah.
In fact, his maiden name is Rita.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He was so shocked. I was like, "Is this possible?" And he said, "No, absolutely not." And yeah, it turns out. So. Well, because the father was in the news every day at the turn of the century with that flying to. I mean, it was just amazing, and he was the thousands of dollars, and then he never achieved it.
Yeah, right.
So he becomes
joke.
rejected. Yeah, a joke.
It becomes sort of a joke.
Yeah, and even though he was one of the most respected journalists, and the same thing happens. She marries a guy who is one of the first to be asked to leave the New York Stock Exchange board, mercantile board, and he is a complete washout. And then I don't know. I work hard, and then
Total inside.
I know. And so she was one I really wanted to know because of Barbarians, and we were doing the panel you asked me to be on, and I just started getting crazy. And but she marries this guy who was really. Never felt up to, even though he had the money, he was a tennis champ, but he couldn't make a living at it. And he gets on this, and then he's asked to leave. And not long after that, they split up, and then he committed suicide, shot himself in the head, and in his hands was an envelope with Rita's name and phone number. So there's a romantic story for you. But she really lived quite a tortured life on lots of levels, both because of her father's kind of being rejected, even though initially he was a huge deal, and then and living in high society because of the cash, and then marrying someone in high society, and it just absolutely. And she had a wonderful daughter, and later remarried, and really just lived a very quiet life at the end. But
So when are we getting a biography?
when are we getting a whole bunch of things?
Yeah. That sounds like a fascinating.
Yeah, it's a great story. Oh my
Great
God.
story.
Just talking about Barbarians, I think I'm right about that. I recently came across material. Jig Cook said that he had the sense when a play was going to be successful, but he was mistaken about Barbarians because it was very successful and he didn't think it would be successful.
Is that interesting?
So I'm not sure where I found that.
Jig Cook admitting he's wrong?
It's pretty huge.
You're right, this is quite an extraordinary.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
About that, he said Barbarians, he really couldn't imagine how it would play, and it played very well.
Yeah, it was such dark humor in a sense, you know.
Right,
Yeah.
and why, I mean, the name change and why it vanished, and nobody ever, you know, talked, there were reports that it had been performed other places, but I could never track down any of the other productions, either under either title.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, so this is a little off, but you said you couldn't find it. I got mixed up today. I thought for some reason it was 2 hours that we saw these plays, and I rushed here, and it was 3 o'clock. And I thought, what could I do between 3 and 4? And it turns out, maybe some of you know, some of you must know this, but I didn't know it. They have digitalized materials from the Provincetown Advocate from the beginning until the 60s. And I found something extraordinary just now, 2 things actually.
Wonderful.
So I was just thinking that.
What did you find?
Well, I just have to share it with somebody. Well, I have it written down. That's Susan Glassell, and you can go online. You can do it at home. I didn't know any of this. I turned pages for weeks in the Provincetown. That they did Suppressed Desires here, and did I write the date? In the 30s, so, 1933, and Susan was invited to come and see the play, and she says this. She was interviewed, and she said, well, I think I'm going to talk about it tomorrow night, but the play isn't so much a satire on psychiatry about people who take things too far, but that's less interesting. She says that the play was actually not first done in Provincetown. That's the quotation now, I don't know.
Susan says this.
Susan says this, and it's in quotation marks. It was first done at the Liberal Club.
Oh.
Wow.
Wow.
They did it between 15 and 16.
See, that's my point.
But it's not done, so it's not a theater, it wasn't done in the theater, but she says that people say that in 15 it was the premiere, but in fact it was done at the Liberal Club, so I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
It could have been the Floyd Dell Players.
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah, at the Liberal Club.
And with her in the play, and then it gets confusing because.
Well, because she did do it a year later at the Liberal Club.
Right.
Between 15 and 16 summers, she did it at the Liberal
She
Club.
says it was done in the
Twice.
winter of 15.
Yeah, so that would be after the first summer, and that's.
No, it would be the winters before the first.
Oh,
summer.
I see how you're
Winter
looking at it.
15.
Okay, good.
So anyhow, I
Okay,
don't know if that's,
yeah.
that you'd have to do.
Because they did, yeah, they
That's
did
when
it
they
twice
wrote
at the
it. You
Liberal
think of,
Club.
like February 15, isn't that when they
Yes.
actually wrote it? So
That's interesting. Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
if they played it then, that they had to have
Yeah.
written it,
Yeah.
or at least read all those pieces together.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I found, and I always have this feeling that Harry Kemp you have to take with a grain of salt, but there is something where Harry Kemp describes a scene where Jig and Jean O'Neill are fighting over Jean O'Neill not wanting Jig to direct Emperor Jones, and they threw plates. Do you know that?
No.
Oh, so it's a whole thing.
Wonderful.
You can go and download
Thank
it.
you.
Are those the plates where we ate lunch? Is that
that's where they threw the plates.
maybe that's a custom around here.
And he tells the story about them throwing plates, but then they got a drink.
Well, you know,
and it was okay.
there's always been this discussion of the violent arguments they would have, and I've never seen one account of them.
Well,
And so there's always that discussion, so that's cool, because I've always wondered, where does that come from?
There's
Yeah.
there's another account in a letter that was Marjorie Bolton's memoir, I guess, or her daughter's memoir.
Right.
Sorry, in which apparently Jig Cook threw a bottle of an open bottle of ink at O'Neill as he and Susan were leaving to go to Greece.
Wow.
Which
That
is
doesn't
strange.
sound right.
It doesn't quite. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
And he says in this letter, this bystander that it seems to me has no reason to lie about it. It gives that account, but then there are letters from Jig coming back saying, you know, Edna, don't worry, O'Neill will come around and he'll understand our side of the story. And so it's not like he had completely given up on O'Neill not selling
those
out
missing
from his
letters from
perspective,
Greece that he
but-
never sent are the ones that everybody would love to know, because he tried to expel his demons with all the players by writing these letters in Greece, and Susan says he didn't mail most of them, but no one's ever.
But a lot of them are in the
But
Burg.
some of them are there, yeah.
And at UVA. I mean, there are a couple of, he's expelling demons.
Sure,
Those letters that
absolutely,
you get.
absolutely.
Yeah.
This is 1960. This was, it's called The Friendly Fight.
Okay, thank
It's
you.
in the Provincetown Advocate.
Well, so 16.
60.
60, okay, thank you.
But Harry Kemp was quite old then, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, Harry Kemp
Yeah.
was telling
He
me.
was.
Right,
It's a story in detail.
Oh, God. Harry Kemp was a great inventor.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, so my biggest question to you as a panel is that, I mean, seriously, you cannot imagine this many women at this time in one place doing what they're doing. And that kind of blows my mind, you know. That wonderful, but really throws a wrench in things article in which Susan does an interview at the Provincetown and Ida shows up. And they really talk about the fact, Crocker, she had an interesting first name.
Boswell Crocker.
Yes, Crocker. That they were actually going to do one of her plays, but they had yet to tell her. And they were already in rehearsal. I mean, and that Susan said, oh yeah, well that's what we do. You know, that process of, it wasn't like necessarily everybody was writing but part of the gang and all of those things. Somehow these things did get submitted.
Edna Ferber's play was already in the process before when Edna found out.
Yeah.
And said, oh, excuse me.
Yeah, Jimmy Lane screwed that up bad. And so there, but so it intrigues me in a sense that then that means at the core of the Provincetowners, which well, Wellman was in by inclusion, right? That this other core that kind of, because of course Neith stayed up here pretty much, and they had family issues and all the different things she did to not go to the New York group. What does it make you hear? I mean, what does it make you think about this?
I think what the point that I was trying to make was that it wasn't just theater. And
Right.
here, I mean, you call them the backbone, the women backbone, but it wasn't just theater that they were doing. I don't think it would have been possible. And Cheryl, and you talk about the decline in the participation of women toward as every year from 1918 to 1922. So, you know, as they became more professionalized, or as it came to an end, you know, and that they didn't compete for Broadway, you know, they didn't. And so I think my point is that they were of a radical community, and they were doing they were involved in political activities. And so it was more of a natural, but it was intertextual in that sense, that the social text and the theatrical text were working together. Because I don't think they were trying to break into a theater community. It was just the opposite.
Well, in fact, that's
They
why
made it a
you
theater.
see so much satire about their own lives
Yes.
at the beginning of everything.
Yes.
You know, and then you get
Exactly.
something like Butcher's Night thrown in there, or contemporaries, which we'll see tomorrow. You know,
Right.
those were from playwrights in a sense. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Rather than from this
Yeah.
core of.
And also
you know.
Edna Kent and Susan Glasgow were doing most of the reading for
Right.
the.
Say that, speak a little louder.
Oh, I'm sorry. Edna Kent and Susan Glasgow were doing most of the reading of the play, of the
Yeah,
submissions or what they were going to do.
Well, and I think that changes. If you look at what's in the first three bills, and then everything's after that, because pretty much the whole function of the organization fell apart, and by December they thought it was over. And then thankfully Nina Moyes shows up
Right.
and starts the change. So that's a huge
That's
thing.
huge.
And then Susan and Edna, as you say, were the basic readers from that point
Right,
on.
right.
And that can't but have made a huge difference on the play choices.
Right, because
on the
when they
whole.
said they used to vote on them, except for the fact that nobody ever read the plays and
Right.
showed up at the meeting.
Right, that's right.
And the only people willing to do that
It's
were
just,
the
well, because they wanted all of it, and then they all fell asleep. They couldn't do it, you know.
And of
so-
course, if Fitzy hadn't been there, the whole place would have fallen
That's right.
apart before it even started.
But
I
would
think
Nina Moyes have been so accepted into a more professional theater community? Probably not. You know, it was because they were active. in
Well, and I think
political-
Jig, yes, and Jig saw, she knew what she was talking about.
Exactly.
And so, yes, now, you know.
She says,
I
I
mean,
just wondered if you described how They were all bumping into each other.
Yeah, I know.
No sense of
Don't
blocking
you wish you had
whatsoever.
video of that?
Yeah.
On this teeny weeny stage, you know. Amazing.
Defeating women.
I know, seriously. And that's another story to be told. Also, Nina Moyes, her life before, is pretty fascinating. She was the first to give the baccalaureate speech at Stanford, first woman ever in 1905. 1905. And her family was a very rich family in San Francisco. Buttons. They were the number one button manufacturer in San Francisco. And so she was able to go to Stanford, and she lived quite an interesting life.
She must have been one of the few women.
Yeah, oh yeah. And then also in theatrics, she studied there. And so that was also very unique.
What year did she go to Stanford?
1905 was the baccalaureate, so I think the 4 years before that. So yeah, and in fact they give her speech in one of the annuals at Stanford.
Jig taught in Stanford.
Yes, well it makes you wonder. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Although we don't know, that was about the same time. They're right. Yeah, isn't that wild? You know, it makes your brain just go.
Has someone done the biography?
No. Not that I know. I don't even know. You know how well, I'm not going to tell you how to find it. But anyways, Ancestry.com is my friend. Let's put it that way. It starts you on so many paths that at least you can find out about. And then you have to go find more. But it has opened my eyes. Most of the material on Rita started with Ancestry.com. And kind of blew my mind. I've got it for most of the different people because all those, you know where they, Polly Holiday. When you follow her past, we never hear about her. After 1916, she lived quite a life for another 40 years. Molly Price, who she married the guy that was Jig's friend in Greece.
Right, because he accompanied Nila back to New York, and he looked like.
And then married Nila's best friend after Molly died. Do you know that?
What?
Married Nila's best friend, and they were together for 40 years, married. And after Molly died. Wild stuff. Isn't that wild?
This is all Ancestry.com.
Ancestry.com, baby. That's the best 20 bucks. Best 20 bucks I spend a month. I'm telling you. Yeah, it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bravo.